Good evening and a very warm welcome to everyone. My name is Victoria Beadle and I'm the CEO of Melanoma Patients Australia and your host for tonight's consumer webinar on the topic of detecting melanoma, new approaches and living well beyond a melanoma diagnosis. Firstly, I'd like to make an acknowledgement to country. We pay our respects to the traditional custodians of the lands and their elders, both past and present, and acknowledging the deep continuing connection of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples to the land, the waters and the sky. Our first speaker will be Professor Pascale Guitera, followed by Aaron Kelly, who will be sharing his personal story. Professor Guitera is Director of the Sydney Melanoma Diagnostic Centre at Royal Prince Alfred Hospital and the Dermatology Department at MPA. She's a senior researcher at the University of Sydney and supervises several PhD and master's students. Thank you for joining us tonight, Professor. I'd like to welcome Aaron, our other expert speaker. Aaron is a loving husband, father, sports lover, and stage 3 melanoma survivor. He was diagnosed in 2012 with metastatic malignant melanoma after discovering a lump under his right arm, shortly after his 30th birthday. Aaron was always and still is sun smart. Growing up, he was fit, healthy, and an active father of 3. He questioned how he could have cancer. Now a passionate volunteer for MPA and its support group in central Queensland and for Rockhampton, Melanoma March fundraising events. By sharing his cancer journey, he hopes to raise awareness about improving prevention, detection, and treatment outcomes to reduce suffering caused by cancer. Thank you so much, Aaron, for joining us this evening. We are very grateful that you will be with us tonight to share your story. Okay, well, I would like to move not to Q&A, but to our first speaker, who is our professor this evening, Professor Guitera. I'd like to welcome you to share your screen and share your PowerPoint presentation. Look forward to a great evening.
I'm mostly talking about detecting melanoma and in particular the diagnosis. Computer is not doing much. So the outline is for these 30 minutes, an intro on melanoma, the issue and where it comes from, the diagnosis of melanoma, and I will talk about the basic with dermoscopy and detection of change, some new approach, and confocal microscopy is one of the examples I will give you. And then I will try to look very far away in the future and talk to you about the integration of AI and why it is complex. And then what I think is another avenue for the future of diagnosis, that is integration of morphology with biology. So I hope we'll still have plenty of time for questions. So with the introduction, melanoma fact, I'm afraid you know Australia and New Zealand have highest rate of melanoma in the world. 1 person is diagnosed with melanoma every 30 minutes. And one of the very annoying facts is it's the most common cancer of the 20 to 39 years old. And of course, it can be a cancer that kills, and it's not an age for that. Then you know that men are a little bit more at risk of melanoma, with 1 in 12 male that will be diagnosed before the age of 75 and 1 in 15 women before the age 75. So early detection of melanoma is really a primary key of what we're doing, because when we detect it early, it's not a problem. And we know 95% of melanoma are due to this UV damage. How it works, basically the melanocytes that are at the basal layer of the epidermis are these cells that have some sort of dendrite and produce melanin to protect, like an umbrella, the other cells that are important for the skin. But the UV will break the DNA of these cells and create mutation that's normally repair if it's a little bit of sun, but can be completely broken and do a cascade of mutation that will do the catastrophe of the melanoma long run. So an overview of the skin. As you can see, we have an epidermis and a dermis, and then the subcutis where the fat is. And the melanocytes are at this membrane basal there. And we often talk about basal cell carcinoma. Sadly, BCC is nearly every Australian after a little bit of time because it's due to chronic sun damage. And so they're coming from these basal cells that are keratinocyte. They're a different cell than the melanocytes. So the melanocytes are doing the melanoma, and the squamous cell carcinoma are often coming from the sunspots that are this very upper layer of the keratinocyte that are UV damaged and then can become invasive and quite dangerous. So as you can see, the melanoma always begin at the membrane in between the epidermis and the dermis. And the good news is they have absolutely no contact with lymph and vessels. So they're not directly a problem when the melanoma is in situ, meaning it's progressing only in the epidermis. It's not touching blood flow and lymph node. And so that's why the diagnosis is key in the early stage, because everything depends on the depth of the melanoma. The more a melanoma is diving in and invasive, the more it's dangerous. So it is in particular 0.81 millimeter, where we discuss sentinel node biopsy, which is the fact that the melanoma can spread in a lymph node. So the Breslow thickness, Mr. Breslow described this depth of the melanoma, have been really one of the main prognosis factor for melanoma. So how we do a diagnosis? The first thing that we need to do is to evaluate the history and the risk factor of our patient. If they are at risk, we undress them, because if not, we cannot do anything there. And it seems basic, but of course, a lot of GP don't have time to properly undress the patient and look everywhere, and in particular in the back, as back is the main area of melanoma in male patients in particular. The other thing that we have that has been a real breakthrough is this dermoscope, that are a little lens and a special light that allow us to see inside the skin and penetrate the first two layers with a good magnification. And I will talk to you also about digital monitoring and total body photo. So history, the main thing that we need to know is the patient having a melanoma already, because that is the main risk factor to have another melanoma. Then they had basically the childhood and the gene and everything to do one. And sadly, that multiplied by 10 the risk of doing another melanoma. The non-melanoma skin cancer are also an important risk factor because they're a marker of chronic sun damage. And then family history of melanoma is a lot less important risk factor. Of course, the nevus burden, and in particular dysplastic nevus syndrome, which is a big name to say that a patient have plenty of mole and some of them are a little bit atypical. This phototype 1 and 2, so this phototype is just your tone of skin and hair that is getting you to burn instead of tanning. And of course, people who are black or even a very dark brown have less risk of this very nasty sunburn that will give this problem down the track of melanoma. So we look also if people are protecting themselves, and also at immunosuppression, like transplant patient, for example, will have a very high risk, in particular non-melanoma skin cancer. I'm all talking about diagnosis, but I want to say and emphasize that prevention is everything. So if we can act on all these risk factors and get our message out there, it's really the best. And it looks like the young generation coming is a lot better than our 70 and 80 years old Australian. So the first things we look at is this ABCDE rule that is quite easy to remember, because it's A for asymmetry, B is for border that are irregular, C is for color, multiple color, variation of color, get us nervous, diameter more than 6 millimeter. This is not exactly right, as you will see, but most of the time we diagnose melanoma when they are at this stage. But a melanoma is most likely to be completely de novo, meaning not on a mold. So it's 1 millimeter and then 2 millimeter and then 3. And then we catch them when they're 6 and over, but we could do better. Evolving is a very important one. So melanoma is cell dividing and non-stop proliferating. So something that is changing will get us nervous. You see this photo here with benign lesion and the malignant one. And really, it's all about chaos in color and pattern that will get us to be worrying about melanoma. So you may know that we have different types of melanoma. The most common one is the superficial spreading melanoma. But now in Australia, lentigo maligna and lentigo maligna melanoma are getting as common because, in fact, LM are a form of superficial spreading melanoma that happen on chronic sun damage. And of course, as I was telling you, it's a lot of Australians that have this type of melanoma. Thanks God, nodular melanoma, that are these things, are very rare, but they're also the one that kill the patient because they grow very quickly. And sometimes they're not recognized by the patient and sometimes even not recognized by the doctor. The aqual lentiginous are the ones that are on the nail, the palm and the sole are a different type of melanoma, most of the time not due to UV damage and quite rare, but quite pregnant in Asiatic population and more dark population. The desmoplastic melanoma subtype is a very tricky one that is a little bit looking like a scar or a whitish area that can be sometimes difficult. So just to show you some photo of obvious melanoma, this one is a lentigo maligna, and you may find this one quite obvious, but when you have plenty of pigmentation and age spots in our patient a little bit older, it can be really difficult. And one of the characteristics of lentigo maligna is it grows very slowly. And so the patient are not always aware. This one, of course, is a nodular melanoma. They can look really quite frightful and they grow quickly. So one thing that is a big message to repeat and repeat again is melanoma can be pink. It can be non-pigmented. And people mistake them for wart, for sore, for different things. But a pink lesion that is growing and changing is certainly not an insect bite and need to be reviewed. So careful history of your patient, but also of the lesion itself is really important. And as I was telling you, most melanoma are completely new lesions. They look like a mole at the beginning, and then they're becoming more and more irregular. But they're not developed on one of your friends that you had all your life. And then a fact of Australia, because we have a lot of Anglo-Celtic background, is that a lot of melanoma have no color. And it's in particular the one that are dangerous, the nodular acral lentiginous melanoma, desmoplastic melanoma. And so this subset sadly escaped the ABCD rule, and we need this EFG, so elevated, firm, and growing. And so any lesion that continue to change in size, shape, color, or elevation for more than months need to be reevaluated and should be excised and certainly not monitored. But as you can see, some melanoma like this one could look like dermatitis or psoriasis and not really a nasty killer. So dermoscopy has been really a breakthrough for us of the last century. This is a complicated way of talking, but basically it means that your chance of doing a diagnosis of a correct diagnosis of melanoma when you use a dermoscope is 15 times higher than when you use just your naked eyes. And it also diminishes the number of benign lesions that we remove for nothing, because of course it's also a problem. We don't want our patient to become complete patchwork with too many removed. So I try to put you there some of the positive feature of melanoma, so you have a little idea of what we're chasing when we look at our dermoscope and look at the skin of our patient. The multiple brown dots, the variation of color, and in particular 5, 6, it means it needs to be removed. The blue-white veil is this sort of blue hue there That is very frightening because it means that the melanoma is already deep, so it's a reason to remove. The gray-blue area are also a positive feature. The pseudopod has this sort of advance of radial streaming or streak that are getting out in superficial spreading melanoma. They're pushing inside the epidermis and give this sort of sticky area there. And then the peripheral pigmented dot or globule are a sign of cells migrating upwards. They're not at the basal membrane anymore, and they create this nest of cells that are migrating upwards. The white scar-like area are a sign of regression. Very often our immune system tries to clear up the problem. And so that's why we have variation of color and this white patch happening. Now, we're not doing an easy job. And in this back of this patient, there is no melanoma. And what he has quite ugly is this H-spot or barnacles, as some of our patients call them. And, it's the most common thing that you can have after a certain age. And we don't want people to jump on them and remove like it's a nodular melanoma. But if you can see in these two photos, one is a melanoma and the other is an H-spot. And of course, they can look very much similar. The other mimicry that's, for everybody and everywhere is the mole or navy. And some of them can be really with variation of color also, like on this example, an ill-defined border and really not that easy to diagnose. We have the blue navy that are completely benign and often present since a long time. But you see this color is normally what we worried about. And so we need to distinguish that from a blue-white veil. Of course, pigmented BCC can be very frightful. They're also blistering, bleeding very often. But for us, it's not a big deal because anyway, we need to remove them. So if we're not sure if it's BCC or melanoma, that's no big deal. I just wanted to show you this one because they're all melanoma on the screen. And compared to what I've shown you with all the positive feature, there is this bright red vessels, but it's not easy to do a diagnosis of melanoma with no color at all. Some of them are really looking like little freckle or not much. So one of our tricks is this digital monitoring or short-term monitoring. It's a very simple thing. When the lesion is shallow, and we know that because of the color, they're brown or black, we authorize to do a photo with our dermoscope and ask the patient to come back 3 months after. And the beauty is in 3 months, very few mole are changing. Well, a lot of melanoma will change and be a lot more obvious. And in 3 months, the burst of thickness will not change. So we can avoid excision for nothing and still get the patient safe with the excision of the melanoma. Another thing that we use is a total body photography. So the entire surface of the patient is photographed. And what is great is we detect BCC and other also with these things. And in our hand, and in particular, very high-risk patients, a lot of these melanoma are completely inconspicuous. We can't distinguish them under dermoscopy, but because they're changing, then we monitor them and then we can see it's happening and we remove them. You may have been aware that there is now this 3D whole body imaging, and that is a great way of doing total body photo because the human body is all curvature, and in 2D it projects different angle. And the idea would be that we could follow our patient and detect change with an automatic way of doing things, just pressing a button. You may be aware of this beautiful grant that Professor Sawyer have been getting from the Australian Cancer Research Foundation. It's $10 million to equip 15 center remote and CT1 in Queensland, Victoria, and New South Wales. And this project will get us a lot of that. Sorry, thank you. There is new approach also on confocal microscopy. So it's my son that is there. So yes, I wanted to talk to you about confocal microscopy. So this is only available in very few centers. And we have some machine that allow us to see the cells directly in the skin. So it's like doing a biopsy, but without cutting. And I just want to show you a little bit of this advance. Basically, what you have here is the skin that we have seen with the epidermis and the dermis. And the confocal will do an en face section of your different layer of the skin and see the pigmented cells, because melanin backscatter the light. And so the cells that are pigmented appear very bright. And so you can see the cells, the organization of the cells, and do a diagnosis in vivo on your own patient. This is a reconstruction of a stack of image. So from the upper layer, I'm going down, down, down in the skin. So my patient is discussing with me at the moment. They're alive. I'm not looking with a pathology sample. But as you can see, the cells that are pigmented there are well organized around the papillae. They're monomorphous and they're very nice. Now, this machine can also reconstruct a big field of view of 8 by 8 millimeter and 10 by 10 now, in fact. And you can see that the organization is perfect and well organized. It's a little bit looking like an Aboriginal painting, which is definition of beauty. Let's see this lesion now on the neck of a patient. You're not a dermoscopist nor a confocalist, but you can see immediately this one is chaos, and you can see some bright cells, some sort of nest, some sort of, and of course it is the melanoma. So that's the way we can do a diagnosis. It's a fantastic machine also because we can move freely. And in particular for all this lentigo maligna that I was talking, when we have plenty of freckle, and you can see here a patient with an lentigo maligna that was going a lot further than what we can see. But there it's a solar antigen, just a freckle. And then it's a sunspot, so we need a little bit of prio. And then it's negative. So really to know where to do our biopsy, to map the area that we need to treat and to follow up these patients, this has been a great breakthrough. Melanoma Institute Australia have some patient information brochure about confocal, total body photo, and lentigo maligna. So if you are interested into more data about that, I refer to this. All right, I would like to project into the future because it's fun, and I'm sure you're very aware of this big buzz about artificial intelligence. So artificial intelligence is defined by the ability of the computer to simulate human intelligence. And the machine learning as this algorithm or model that learn from data. And basically we give them a training set where we tell them this is a mole, this is a melanoma. And then we give them a non-label test set, and they have to find their way through what is malignant and what is benign. An unsupervised learning is even more funny in the sense that the machine need to create by itself some novel pattern or cluster that can be identified in the data without an influence or prior knowledge or labeling. And I just wanted to tell you, because it's sometimes very difficult to understand where we are at. Where we are at is basically our problem with the big data set and AI for the diagnosis of melanoma is the generalizability, very difficult to pronounce. So anyway, we need to know all the image, the type, the artifact, the acquisition method, because a machine will be as good as your test set. And so if you come suddenly with something different, and for example, if a patient put psoriasis or dermatitis and has the machine, most of the machine will tell you it's a melanoma because it looks weird. It doesn't know what it is, so it will classify it as something weird. The image capture may not be representative also of the proportion of diagnosis. And one of the problems we had so far is that we have put in our machine our database. So they're high-risk patients, they're mostly Caucasian, and it's very different from a normal sort of patient with a lower risk, and for example, a black person, every photo from a black person will be labeled melanoma, which is obviously not appropriate. It is unclear whether or not FDA, TGA, all our regulation will allow to continue to modify and improve machine learning. The old way the regulation works is you test a machine and then you say it's working or not. But these machines are constantly learning. And it's very important because of the very reason of out of range image that we continue to feed them, and in particular feed them with our local patient data. So it's working for our local patient and not for another place in the planet. And then, of course, one of the big problems we'll have with all this is liability. So how to evaluate, how to take the responsibility, and what will be the impact on the patient, on the health system. None of that have been tested so far. One of the things that we found the most difficult as dermatologists and doing diagnosis every day is the lack of explicability of these things. So we know that we don't have simple rule, and for the machine to explain how they came to this conclusion is most of the time impossible. And so we'll have to accept it or not. And then one of the big problems is we have to participate, and Peter Sawyer and MIA, we all putting all our photo, I reassure you completely, they identify little dermoscopy photo in big public data sets. So we can have different lab and very smart IT people to contribute. But the fact that we need to label and work with this enormous amount of image mean time and expense, and if the field is working in another direction, it will be a complete waste of time and things. But I do think the benefit could be real, and it will increase the value of diagnostic imaging. As you have seen, our diagnosis process is really complex with a lot of data that we integrating when we do the diagnosis, and maybe the machine will remove some bias or mistake from the human being. We could increase image quality and decrease acquisition time. We could improve the workflow and certainly the education of the doctor with these things, and maybe communication and patient safety could be think through. So the last future direction that I think is really important, and I hope we'll get somewhere, is the integration of not only morphology, what we're doing with confocal and pathology to do a diagnosis, but also biology. And as you're aware, a lot of people are working on gene and proteomic and lipidomic and you name it. And nowadays we have a way, for example, to take tape stripping. So we just take a tape and remove few cells on the top of your lesion and try to work with these few cells that we have removed. What are their proteomic and lipidomic, and try to find a signature that could be important to understand where the lesion is benign or transiting to premalignant or transiting to invasive. And we do know a lot of mutation, but for the moment, none of them have been a perfect marker. And I think that's really the holy grail. If we would have a perfect marker, it would simplify so much our life. So that's it. And I would be very happy to take all your questions.
Thanks so much, Professor Guitera. What a fantastic update. And it was just great to see, some of the challenges of dermatologists in actually, working through all those different types of lesions that you have to kind of work through to identify the ones at risk. And it was also really interesting and amazing actually to hear about some of the sort of future AI areas and what the future of detection could look like. So really appreciate that. We are going to hold questions until we've heard from our second speaker, so I hope that's okay. We've got some great questions coming through, but it's a great point for me to encourage anyone in the audience now to pop them into the Q&A, and we'll work through them, and we'll bring everyone back together after I've introduced our second speaker, Aaron Kelly. So I'd like to welcome Aaron to the stage and look forward to hearing your presentation. Aaron, welcome.
Thanks so much, Victoria. Good evening to everyone in attendance tonight. It's a real pleasure to be asked to share my melanoma story. As mentioned by Victoria earlier, I'm a survivor of stage 3 metastatic melanoma with an unknown primary. In fact, this week was my 10-year cancerversary, and I got to celebrate with my family and friends earlier this week with a nice dinner and drinks. So it's quite timely that I've been asked to speak tonight. So I thought I'd like to quickly introduce myself. As mentioned, I'm a husband and proud father of 3 teenage children. I live in Rockhampton, Central Queensland, the beef capital. I'm also a sports lover and was up early this morning to cheer on the Socceroos in their World Cup win over Denmark. I'm a journalist by trade and now work in a family business. And I joined the 4-0 club this year. Yes, the big 40. And on rare weekends at home, I like to smoke meat, and one day want to open my own boutique beer brewery, but that's down the track. I'm also a passionate MPA community member and fundraiser for the MIA. And prior to melanoma, I was a keen runner. So I'd just like to now touch on my story. I wanted to speak about what I did when I was first diagnosed and how I kept a positive vibe, particularly for my young children at the time, and also my family and friends. So, as I said, I want to give you an insight into living with melanoma well beyond my diagnosis, and that was, 10 years ago, and I'm still here today. I used to keep a positive mindset on my journey right from the beginning till now, and I still do to this day. So shortly after my 30th birthday, I noticed a lump under my right arm, sorry. I was right into my running training at the time, and I just entered my first half marathon here in Rockhampton. I passed it off as a swollen sweat gland, and after a couple of weeks, my wife urged me to go get it checked. Yes, you could say I was being a typical male, and the big C didn't enter my mind. In weeks to follow, that little pea-sized lump under my right arm had grown to a marble, and from my initial biopsy and scan, it had tripled in size. How I thought something so minor could be something so major. As I said, I was diagnosed with stage 3 metastatic melanoma with an unknown primary, which was sort of hard to comprehend at the time. How could I have cancer? I'd never had melanoma before. I was always sun smart growing up as a kid. I played a lot of sports as a kid, would be playing soccer, rugby league, cricket in the summer. How did I, get this diagnosis? How would it affect my family? How would it affect my work? So all these questions were sort of coming into my mind. Next slide. So here is 2012, I should say. This is my post-right axillary clearance. As you can tell, my children were quite very young at the time. My son at the back there, Jack, he was only in year 2. My daughter next to Jack is Hannah. She was only kindy in the time. The little cheeky one at the front, Pippa, she was only a toddler. So it was quite a big shock to my young family that, I had this diagnosis. Shortly after my surgery, we got through Christmas and we made the move to Brisbane so I could commence radiation treatment. At the time in Rockhampton, there was no such service or treatment availability for me to have here in town. So we sort of packed up for the first few weeks. My wife and children came down before they had to return home to Rockhampton with school beginning and so forth. For those not from Rockhampton in Queensland, from Rocky to Brisbane, it's a good 8-hour drive, an hour and a bit by plane. So it is, we're in central Queensland here. We're in the middle between Rockhampton and Townsville. At the time, it was quite stressful for my young family. The kids really didn't know what was happening with Dad, how come he had to go to the hospital every day. We did make it a bit fun for them, and Dad, my son Jack, was right into Transformer movies at the time, so we called the radiation machine a transformer, and Dad had to go to visit the transformer every day. So yeah, we made it quite involved for the kids, so they knew what Dad was going through. But while it was tough for us, each day when we walked into the Royal Brisbane Hospital, particularly the cancer wards, we did notice, a lot of people are doing it tough, and a lot tougher than what we were. Young children, to other people. So from there, I really made it. I wanted to stay positive and physically as strong as possible. I was still running at the time. Towards the end, it was more like a slow shuffle, but I wanted to maintain some sort of exercise just to keep my mental and physical well-being. Being away from my wife and children for that long period of time was extremely tough, more than the physical pain, particularly towards the end of my radiation treatment. Next slide. So while in Brisbane, while waiting for treatment one day, I was sitting there with a friend of mine at the time, and in one of the newspapers, they were promoting a twilight running festival, and I thought, why not? I'm down here, I'm getting treatment. I thought it was a good way to show my kids, my loved ones back home, that just because I was going through something like my treatment at the time, that I couldn't be who I was. So I got through the half marathon that afternoon, that evening. It was quite treacherous conditions. We had rain, a bit of hail, lightning, thunder. It was, 4 seasons in one day, a bit like Melbourne. So with training pretty shy of what I normally complete, I finished the race alongside with two of my best friends. And the only sign of treatment during the race under my race singlet was like a Fireburns compression garment, just so it could stop that friction building under my scarred skin below. While it was an exhausting and sort of tiring ordeal, probably wasn't a wise one at the time, I still remember the feeling of accomplishment and achievement, and I was pretty proud of myself, and my children really were pretty proud with what Dad achieved. So I proved right there that I could conquer any hurdle or any curveball that got thrown my way, which is what everyone goes through with a cancer diagnosis. Little did I know that when I finished my treatment, when I returned to Rockhampton, there'd be another hurdle just around the corner. I'd suffered an immediate setback when I returned home. I had a lump under my right breast, which was serious. So I had to undergo a mastectomy of my right breast, and then from there further test scans. Next slide. So with more scars to heal, I stayed positive and signed up for the 2013 Gold Coast Marathon, which was only about 12 weeks from post-surgery with my mastectomy. You guys are probably thinking right now, this guy from Rockhampton's kind of crazy, but again, I wanted to put my mind towards something and train towards something, and really keep that reality of the situation which my young family and I were going through. So with not many weeks to train, I laced up for the iconic Gold Coast event alongside thousands of others, and set a race time of around 4 hours, 4.5. I was just happy to cross the finish line, to tell you the truth. And just getting to the start line was a pretty big achievement in myself, and I did that with two of my best mates. I'm proud to say that after about 3 hours and 9 minutes and 36 seconds, as it says there in that photo, I crossed that finish line. I had some close family and friends there cheering me on that last couple of 100 meters, which made it really special. I couldn't have done it with their support, and I couldn't have achieved anything I have in the last 10 years without, my family, friends, and that's one thing that I've really kept. With my cancer journey, I've really been open with them and tried to inspire others to, be positive and, don't let things keep you down. Next slide. Yeah, so to this day, and since my diagnosis, I've had regular checkups. My latest was on Tuesday this week. In Rockhampton, we're privileged to have a vector machine which Pascale showed before, the 3D technology. It maps spots, rashes, moles, and blemishes on the body. This one just last year, I had a little rash on the left-hand side of my face. It was like a blemish every time I'd clip or shave, and it just sort of wouldn't go away. The vector machine picked that up on the left side of my face, and it turned out it's a pretty big scar, but it turned out to be a BCC, and I was lucky that got picked up. And I've had a couple of BCCs taken from my both arms, one on my inner thigh. So I encourage others to really do get regular skin checks. Next slide, thanks. So to this day, I still remember those initial 3 words from my GP when I was called back following a biopsy of that lump. His 3 words, "You have cancer." It really hit me for 6, but I was quite in denial at the start. It took me a long time to speak about my journey. And as a journalist, I found that really difficult, that I tell people's story every day, and how I couldn't tell mine. It was quite a difficult challenge at the time. But after some advice from others and some of my doctors, they thought I should start writing a blog to put my thoughts out there, my fears, my challenges, what I was going through. And at the time, I found that very therapeutic. I would write a blog once a week, once every 2 weeks, once a month, depending how I felt at the time. I also learned to ask lots of questions, particularly when it came to checkups. And I also found that if you're not happy with that first opinion, get a second or third opinion. Trust your gut. Trust that gut feeling of yours. I also learned right from my initial diagnosis to get to know your body and track any changes in your skin. As I said, I've kept a positive mindset along the way, and I try to do something positive every day until this day. I've also, been very, like most people, have been touched by melanoma. If you do spot something on a family member, friend, or a complete stranger, don't be afraid to speak up and tell them, "Hey, I think you should go get that checked." Next slide. As we all know, melanoma is deadly, but research is making a huge difference. I'm proud to be an advocate for the MPA and also the MIA, and I'm also the chair of the Rockhampton Melanoma March. Our first ever event raised more than $20,000 for melanoma research, and attracted over 300 walkers from all walks of life. We had young children, we had melanoma patients, we had family members, survivors. We had quite a number of dogs who got walked on the morning. It was just, it's been great to have that event here in Rockhampton and really put that out there about melanoma and awareness. So looking back on the last 10 years, I'm proud to be speaking here tonight. The stats at the beginning that I was given weren't in my favor, but once I reached that first year, my next goal was to get to 2 years, from 2 years to 3, then to 5. And I'm very proud to say that this week was my 10-year cancerversary. So I hope if you can take something away from my journey and my story tonight, that you can share with others, that if you do keep putting something off, or if you don't get that little thing checked, you don't know what could happen. I know if I didn't get that little lump under my arm checked when I did, my story could be a lot different. I may not be here to tell it or share it with you. I have a blog, as I mentioned before. Next slide. Yeah, my blog is aksmelanomastory.wordpress.com. I haven't written one for quite a while, but it's still up online for people to read and go back on and read a few of my stories from my journey from that initial diagnosis. As you can tell from that opening slide, my 3 young children have grown up to be quite successful in their own right, and rather than me making them proud every day, they make me proud every day, and I'm happy to say that I'd like to thank you for listening, and it's been a really pleasure to share my journey, and I'm look forward to answering any questions from you guys tonight. Thanks.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Aaron. That was such an empowering and inspiring story of hope, but also of real practical strategies that you put in place when you were faced with really challenging circumstances. So really appreciate you sharing such a personal story with us. I'd like to welcome back our Professor Guitera to the panel, and we'd like to get started on some questions that have come through. We've had quite a few questions come through on the Q&A function. So I'm really wanting, first of all, I want to clear up a couple of questions that people had about the first presentation with you, Professor Guitera. And I think they're really important things that we need to clear up, questions of fact. There's a question here about in situ melanomas, and are they classified as a cancer or not? And should people be worried about them?
Yeah, well, yes, they're definitely a cancer, because that cancer cell, they're proliferating on the surface. So there is no question they're cancer. But they're not dangerous because they will not spread and kill people. So it's a little bit like a BCC. The BCC are also cancerous. They will grow and never stop, but they will normally never metastasize and kill people. So we have different type of cancer with different type of aggressivity, basically. But we know also that the normal history of an in situ melanoma is to become invasive. And so if we don't remove the in situ melanoma, they will one day become invasive. You may be aware of the problem of overdiagnosis that have been a sort of issue that have been over the media, and it for sure that we have an excess of in situ, since we really campaigning and less death, which is of course a very good thing, because we have new treatments that are working quite well. But maybe also we think some of this in situ melanoma may be indolent, may never have progressed to an invasive melanoma. And that's really an area of research, because on morphology we can't distinguish them. And I think this is my last slide of morphology, biology. I think it's when we will be able to really melt these two things together that will get to the next scale of diagnosis.
Professor Guitera, am I right in saying that in situ melanomas don't actually make it onto the cancer registries officially? So they're not always counted in the number of melanomas diagnosed?
Well, yes, it depends on the registry. But yes, they've been trying to track this in situ melanoma also, just to understand the phenomenon and understand if it's really an overdiagnosis or incorrect diagnosis, or just the fact that we are better and better to detect these things. Yeah.
And just to clarify then, if somebody has had an in situ diagnosis, do you class them as high risk in your clinic? And what kind of recommended regime of checking would you put in place for someone with an in situ melanoma?
So as I was telling you, anybody who had a melanoma in situ or not in situ, we consider them high risk and we want to see them regularly. So it really depends also of all the other risk factors. So if they are completely clean skin, a very smart person who is well helped by a partner to look at their back, all these sort of things, we may see them every year or even every 2 years. But of course, if they have a lot of sun damage and we need also to treat the sunspot, the BCC, the SCC, all these things, we may see them every 6 months or 4 months to be able to clear everything.
Great, thank you. And there's another question here that was around when you described the size of the lesions and whether the diagnosis is to be discounted if the diameter is less than 6 millimeters. I don't think, I think if you could just maybe give us a little bit of clarity around that.
Sorry, I was not maybe explaining correctly. So in the ABCD rule, this diameter was established 20 years ago. But now in our practice, I would say 50% of the melanoma we diagnose are less than 6 millimeter. So obviously it's not a criteria for diagnosis. It's just that in the past, lesions that are bigger with a variation and chaotic were really the one that we were diagnosing. Now that we have all this photo, the monitoring, the dermoscopy, we're getting better and better at diagnosing them. And we know that most melanoma are happening on the clean skin. So there will be 1 millimeter, 2 millimeter. And if you diagnose them at 3, it's great. Of course, we want to diagnose them as soon as possible. So that's why I say this criteria is now not used anymore at all. But yes, it for, I think a patient perspective, if you have really large lesion, that's something that is often could be one that is a little bit irregular that you need to especially look at. But the same way that we will not remove everything that is more than 6 millimeter, of course not. It's one of the criteria that are not robust.
Great, thank you for clarifying that. And then we had a question asking to clarify what is the most common melanoma diagnosis? Is it LM was a question?
Yes, so I'm a little bit embarrassed by that because this is a classification by the pathologists that are not very well standardized. And what I was trying to convey is superficial spreading melanoma is said to be the most common melanoma, but slowly but surely we are getting more and more lentigo maligna and lentigo maligna melanoma. And in fact, it's the same principle. It's superficial stuff that are on the background of heavy sun damage or not on the background of heavy sun damage. And so that's why this subtype is basically getting more and more common. It's because the population is aging and they're aging with more sun damage.
Fantastic, thank you. The next question, I think we can potentially get some answers off both Aaron and Professor Guitera. It's great to hear about the new technology in detecting melanoma, but the new technology is often situated in metropolitan centres. Although it's great to hear from Aaron that he's got a machine close by in central Queensland, which is wonderful. But it does come at a cost often, and it can disadvantage people from lower incomes and also people who are living in kind of rural and regional areas that don't have access. What what can be done to support people who do have some challenges in accessing services and people who are at high risk?
So I can begin by a sort of doctor point of view. So that's one of the things that would be fantastic if some sort of algorithm could help us to do a diagnosis, because it could be something through your smartphone and an app and will be fantastic, but it's not ready yet. So maybe one day will be ready. And so yes, it's a real problem in Australia because it's such a big country, it's such a large country. So there is two solutions: or the patients come to the center where they have the service, or the doctor come to the remote area. And of course, most of the time, it's the patient that needs to bear all the effort and things. What we try to do is a little bit of telehealth, in particular when it's a treatment follow-up, we can do that. But obviously, you can't do an examination with a dermoscope through the screen. That will not work. So the other thing we try to do is to sort of establishing some rural center with good guys who've been educated and have the tool available. And then it's also share care. So one time they go to see their GP, and one time they come to see us. I don't know, Aaron, if you have some.
Yeah, I think when I was first referred by a fellow MPA member, Leanne Lovegrove, here in town, when we sort of found out about the facility which was opening and the machine that was available, to me straight away the cost didn't bother me. I thought it was an investment in my life, and but I can understand what you say, that others, you know, may balk at that. So yes, it's one of those things. I've since referred, I'd probably say half a dozen friends who have had skin checks at different places, and since they've been and used the machine, you know, they've been back for their 3-month and 6-monthly mapping. So, you know, as I said, I've sort of, you know, at the time, that money to me that it cost, it was investment in my life and to see my kids grow up. So but I do understand what you say.
And prior to the machine coming to Rockhampton, Aaron, how did you manage your regular checks? Were you having to fly?
I'm pretty lucky. My GP, she specializes in skin cancer, and that's, you know, that's her thing. So, you know, I could just book an appointment and see Naveen and say, look, I've noticed something here on my arm, on my leg. What do you think? And she'll have a look at it. And, you know, she's cut out a couple of things in my body already. And, you know, if she thinks there's something is serious, she'll refer me to a specialist. But I'm sort of lucky in that vein that, you know, when I was first diagnosed, I've had her right from the get-go. So it's sort of been lucky in that vein.
That's fantastic to hear. And that leads to another question that we've had from the audience around skin check clinics. And it's a question for you, Professor Guitera. Are there any regulations for skin check clinics? Do the doctors that work there have specialist training that we can trust is good? And what advice would you give patients to look out for when accessing skin check professionals?
That's a political, diplomatic, very hard question. You know, as always, doctors are trying to do the right things, and it's a difficult area. So we have the specialists that are the dermatologists that depend from the College of Dermatology. So they have a sort of certification from the college. And we have the skin cancer GP who are doing some sort of extra curriculum to say that they want to be in this area of skin cancer and melanoma. And sadly, we don't have enough specialists in this country to take care of all the patients. And then, as you say, they're mostly in the city and they're very expensive. So there is plenty of space also for skin cancer GP to do things. Then some skin cancer GP are organized also in a sort of college who give them some training and certificate and certification, but not all of them. And as Aaron was saying, I totally agree with him. You know, if you have a specialist or a GP that you're not happy with, you have the impression they don't communicate correctly with you, or remove too many things, or not enough, or these sort of things, it's important to find someone you can trust and you have a direct communication with. That's for sure. But yeah.
Great, thank you. Sorry for giving you a political hot potato there. It is a challenge, and it completely can depend where you live and what's accessible and what you can afford. So it really is a challenge, I think, for our patients and their families. I've got another question which moves a little bit into prevention, and it's for you, Aaron, around your running. And do you still run? It was one of the questions. And do you get afraid to go outside when the UV rays are always rated very high in Queensland? And what do you use for sun protection?
Yeah, thanks, Victoria. I don't run as much as I would like to these days. I have 2 lovely border collies who I walk most days, but I do that late in the afternoon at a pretty shaded park, and I'm always in a long sleeve shirt when I do walk the dogs. So that's one of my, you know, sun prevention measures, and a hat as well. When I was running, I would have arm sleeves on either arm, particularly my right arm being my lymphedema arm, where I'd have a specialist sleeve I'd wear, but I'd also got into a habit of wearing one on my left arm just for sun prevention as well. You know, long distance running, most people wear singlets. When it came to a race, I'd wear a race singlet with my sleeves, but when it came to training, I'd be pretty sun smart and would do most of it, whether it be early in the morning or late in the afternoon or evening. I'd have a long sleeve shirt on. Yeah, so apart from sun cream, hat, and my arm sleeves, that was pretty much what I do. I play I'm back playing softball competitively as with my younger daughter. She plays softball. We just got home from Melbourne, actually. She was in the Queensland team. So it's been good to be back in Rockhampton, gone out of the freezer in Melbourne to oven back to Rockhampton. But, I wear a long sleeve undergarment. There's top brands out there like Skins, Under Armour. So yeah, I wear a long sleeve white Under Armour underneath my jersey each weekend, and that's a preventive way, which I do. A lot of teammates wear that as well, and that's for the same reason, for sun damage. So yeah, there's a lot of compression and undergarment uniforms you can wear.
Great advice, thank you. I've got a final question, and I think I'd like to hear from both of you, if I could, in terms of your thoughts on it. What would you say to someone who's just been diagnosed with melanoma and is terrified about surgery, to encourage them and to give them hope? Be great to perhaps get a doctor's perspective, clinical perspective first, and then maybe go to you, Aaron, after.
Well, to be honest, the surgery of melanoma is often easier than you think. So I'm talking primary melanoma. So to remove the lesion initially, it's normally quite small, and you finish with suture. It's a local anesthesia, so it's nothing terrifying. It's half hour in your life. It's under anesthesia, obviously. So the needle is not that pleasant, but I'm sure most of us have been through a lot harder thing than that. Then, of course, the lymph node removal or metastasis removal can be big surgery and a lot more difficult to get through. But again, I think most of the time you're heading to a good team, a good hospital. They know inside out how to take care of you. So ask questions, make sure you speak up if you are in pain, because we have painkillers that are quite useful. And yeah, most of the time the surgery is quick enough that you will forget it.
Yeah, thank you. And Aaron, you've been through a couple of pretty tough surgeries.
Yeah, I'd sort of ditto what Pascale said. I never really got a choice when I was first diagnosed. I was pretty much booked in the next day or the day after to have my right axillary clearance. Had the lump and a number of lymph nodes from under my right arm removed. And so to me, I didn't even come into my mind that I didn't want to have it, and I knew I had to have it, and I knew that I had to have treatment. So. But I can understand where some people may be afraid of getting a melanoma or a spot cut off because they don't like a scar, or they might, yeah. So I can see where some people may be a bit hesitant, but at the end of the day, if it means you're going to be alive in 5-10 years time, I definitely encourage people to, if it's bad, get it cut out, and if it's, if you don't get it cut out, it could be worse. You could be up for a bigger surgery down the track. So, minor things can lead to major things. So I'd encourage people that if they do, are hesitant, speak to their doctor, speak to family, friends, and, get a second or third opinion. I'm sure if one doctor says, you need to get this cut out, the second or third is probably going to encourage you to do the same thing.
Great. I've just seen I've got an extra couple of quick questions, very quick fire, because we're really running out of time, but maybe we can get a quick answer to this one from you, Professor. Where can people find out about the total body scan machines, and is there evidence that they are better than normal normal skin exam? Is just a really quick question. I've got one other I'd love to just touch on if we could.
Okay, so basically it's photo is photo. So it's, and even this big machine that looks very impressive is in fact 91 or 2 foot camera. So it's just normal camera, that there's nothing very special. You could do your own total body photo at home if you want with your smartphone. But it's mostly the way we follow things now that is, so we have software that help us to detect things that are changing. That's where it's useful. And where to find them. So some GP do their total body photo, or at least a photo of your back, to be able to follow things. And so it could be really a very simple process, all the way to this 3D software that are quite fancy. The 3D machine, if they look at ASEMINT, it's the consortium that have the 15 machine in Australia, they will find them, but a 2D machine is quite common. It's using a lot of different practice. And then simple camera are in every GP practice, I would say.
Great. So we'll try and put a link to the ASMID clinical research project.
Just a quick word about that. This ASEMID is still a research project. So you sign up for research. You're not signing up for care.
Absolutely. And also, I think the machine that Aaron was referring to, where he has to pay for it, I think that's the same machine as the clinical research project, but it's actually as part of a, not part of the research project. It's actually a private practice offering. So yeah, I just wanted to, mention that those machines may also be available in private practices in some areas and not just as part of the clinical research project. And the final very quick question, Breslow versus stages of cancer. It's a very challenging issue for many of our patients, where they get confused about the diagnostic pathology report around stages and levels of Breslow thickness. Could you just, give us a little 101 on what we need to know, and just a question: could we just stop using Breslow at some point? Is that possible?
No, no, nobody will stop using Breslow. It's very useful and it's so simple. It's just a measurement. It's in millimeter. So anything that is 0 millimeter is in situ. Anything that is more than 1 millimeter gets us a little bit more anxious, and things that are 2, 3, 4 millimeter will have a different management. So we need the Breslow thickness. We'll never abandon it. Then the staging, I've been changing all the time because we recompute enormous data and now find that these guys who have this and this and this are a little bit more at risk of recurrence than these guys that have this and this. So the staging is completely difficult to understand. But to summarize very quickly, or you have an in situ melanoma, or you have an invasive melanoma, or you have lymph nodes, so local regional, so that's your stage 3. And or you have a metastasis and that are spread in your body, and that's your stage 4. So basically, the difference in between stage 1 and stage 2 is just the invasion. The difference in between stage 3 and stage 4 is it spreading beyond the primary to the lymph node to the metastasis. But all the rest, the stage 1A, B, 2C, whatever, forget. Even the doctor, we need to come back to our staging card to get our heads around it. It's really complex.
Great, fantastic. Well, we'll have to draw a close to the session. We've had amazing questions, and look, I just want to say a very big thank you on behalf of everyone at Melanoma Patients Australia and Melanoma Institute Australia to both of our wonderful speakers, to Professor Guitera and Aaron Kelly. I'd like to thank them for sharing their expertise on this really important topic. Living well after a diagnosis of melanoma and the importance of detecting melanomas as early as possible is absolutely critical to our patients and their families. So this information is vital. I'd like to remind everyone of the support services that are available through MPA if you are impacted by diagnosis of melanoma, including our support line, our telehealth nurse service. We have support groups that run around the country and a really fantastic Facebook support group that we'd love to encourage you to join. If you want to find out more, please visit our website, melanomapatients.org.au. A reminder, there will be a survey at the end of the evening, and we'd love to hear from you. We will be planning our webinar series for 2023, and any feedback we get from you will be very valuable to us in that work. And I'd like to let you know that the webinar recording will be recorded and uploaded to the MIA and MPA websites in the coming days, along with the 2 previous webinars that we've recorded over the last 2 weeks. On behalf of everyone, I'd like to thank the team that have sat in the background behind this suite of webinar series, particularly to the team at MIA and at MPA. Claire Kelly, Hayley Andrews and Danielle. I really appreciate the work that you've done to put our series together, and thank everyone who's attended, and look forward to our webinar series next year. So on behalf of everyone, I'd like to wish you a good night, and thanks again.